Yahya ibn Salim was born into a house where silence was heavier than words. His father, Salim, was a man whose devotion showed itself not through sermons or outward displays, but through consistency. He rose before dawn every day without complaint, performed his prayers with calm precision, and returned to his mat as if the world beyond it held no claim over his heart. When he spoke, it was brief. When he corrected, it was firm but never cruel. Yahya's mother died when he was still young, leaving behind the faint scent of old fabric and a memory too fragile to grasp. From that loss, Yahya learned restraint early. He did not cry loudly, he did not rebel. He learned to watch, to listen, and to excel. Praise became the warmth that replaced affection, and achievement became the language through which he felt seen. From childhood, Yahya was marked by brilliance. He memorized quickly, reasoned deeply, and spoke with a calm confidence that made even elders pause. Teachers predicted greatness. Merchants trusted his calculations. Neighbors spoke of him as a boy destined for leadership. His father warned him often that knowledge without humility was a blade without a handle, but Yahya absorbed the advice the way one absorbs distant thunder, aware of it, but unconcerned. He prayed beside his father, fasted when required, and avoided open wrongdoing. By all outward measures, he was righteous, but inwardly, something subtle began to form. A quiet belief that Allah favored him because he was deserving, not because Allah was generous. As Yahya grew older, the world opened its doors easily. Opportunity found him without effort. People sought his counsel, praised his restraint, and admired his composure. When disputes arose, Yahya was invited to mediate. When merchants argued, his word settled accounts. He was not yet 30 when his name carried weight. With every success, his sense of dependence on Allah weakened just slightly, not enough to notice, but enough to matter. Gratitude turned into expectation. Worship became habit, and slowly, admiration from others began to feel necessary. When people praised him, his heart leaned toward their approval. When they criticized him, he felt irritation instead of reflection. He still prayed, but the sweetness of prayer faded. He still gave charity, but he watched carefully who noticed. The first true fracture appeared not as sin, but as comfort. Yahya grew accustomed to being needed. People spoke to him as if his presence guaranteed outcomes, and he did not correct them. When someone said, "If Allah helps anyone, it is through men like you," Yahya felt pleasure rather than fear. He did not deny the statement. He did not rebuke it. He let it settle inside him. That night, his prayer lingered unusually long, but not out of devotion. He asked Allah to preserve his influence, his reputation, his standing. His dependence subtly shifted from reliance to management. Allah became a means to protect status, rather than the purpose of existence itself. As uncertainty entered his life, political shifts, emerging rivals, unpredictable alliances, Yahya's desire for control intensified. He feared losing relevance more than displeasing Allah. It was during this period that someone quietly mentioned a man who understood patterns beyond ordinary sight. Not magic, the man said quickly. Insight, foresight, wisdom hidden from most. Yahya hesitated, but curiosity overcame caution. He justified the visit as strategy, not belief. He told himself that power required understanding unseen currents. The man lived on the edge of the city, surrounded by strange symbols and murmured phrases Yahya pretended not to hear. Nothing dramatic occurred, but Yahya returned again. Each visit calmed his anxiety. Each visit tightened something unseen around his heart. He began to rely on whispered reassurances instead of supplication. Wealth soon followed influence. Yahya entered partnerships, oversaw estates, and managed funds entrusted to him because of his reputation. Among these was the inheritance of 2 orphaned boys, whose father had died suddenly. Yahya was appointed guardian, responsible for safeguarding their property until they reached maturity. At first, he handled the matter carefully. Then, temptation crept in disguised as entitlement. He told himself that managing wealth required compensation. He withdrew small amounts, promising to return them later. Later never came. The sums grew. His conscience protested weakly, but he silenced it with rationalizations. "They are children," he told himself. "They will never know." That night he dreamed of swallowing embers, but when he awoke he laughed and dismissed it as indigestion. Violence entered Yahya's life without blood on his hands. A man accused of dissent, inconvenient to powerful interests, was brought before a council. Yahya signed a document among many, knowing it would seal the man's fate. He did not see the imprisonment. He did not hear the screams. But he knew. When news came that the man had died in custody, Yahya paused only briefly before continuing his meal. He told himself that leadership required difficult decisions. Yet that night, sleep did not come easily. His dreams returned darker, heavier, filled with eyes that accused without speaking. The city began to change. Though Yahya did not notice at first, fear replaced respect. Whispers replaced trust. Those who benefited from his rule praised him loudly. Those harmed learned silence. A widow approached him publicly one day, accusing him of stealing her children's future. Yahya dismissed her calmly, ordering guards to remove her. The crowd obeyed, but the moment lingered. Her voice echoed in his mind long after she disappeared. From that day, rumors grew bolder. People spoke of his dealings, his alliances, his hidden practices. Yahya responded by tightening control. He punished critics. He rewarded loyalty. He convinced himself that stability justified cruelty, but Allah does not allow injustice to remain hidden forever. A financial collapse struck suddenly. Records surfaced. Investigations began. Names were spoken openly now. Yahya's allies abandoned him one by one. The orphan's stolen wealth was exposed. Testimonies emerged. The city turned its back on the man it once elevated. Yahya stood alone in the ruins of his reputation. For the first time in his life, no one needed him. No one praised him. No one feared him. In that isolation, something inside him finally broke. One night, news reached him that the imprisoned man's brother had taken his own life, unable to bear the injustice. Yahya felt a tearing sensation deep in his chest, as if something essential had been ripped away. He attempted to pray, but the words would not form. His heart felt sealed, heavy, unresponsive. He realized with terror that he could no longer feel closeness to Allah. The silence he once knew in his father's home returned, but this time it was suffocating. Stripped of position and protection, Yahya fled the city, not to escape punishment, but because he could no longer endure the weight of himself. He wandered until exhaustion forced him into a forgotten village mosque. Alone on its cold floor, Yahya collapsed. For the first time in years, he spoke to Allah without eloquence, without strategy, without expectation. He confessed everything: the arrogance, the betrayal, the blood on his conscience, the stolen wealth, the false reliance, the silent shirk of loving himself more than his Lord. He wept until pride dissolved into shame, until hope flickered weakly but sincerely. He did not ask for restoration, he asked only for forgiveness. And for the first time in many years, his heart responded. Yahya remained on the cold floor of the mosque long after his tears dried. The night stretched endlessly, broken only by the sound of wind slipping through cracks in the walls. He did not feel relief. Confession had emptied him, but it had not cleansed him. Instead, it exposed the vastness of what he had become. His heart felt like a ruined house, walls still standing, but everything within burned. He rose slowly and left before dawn, unwilling to be seen, ashamed of both his former authority and his present weakness. He told himself he had begun to turn back, but deep inside he feared it might already be too late. As Yahya wandered from place to place, memories followed him relentlessly. He recalled moments he once dismissed as trivial, small lies spoken with ease, glances of superiority cast at those he considered lesser, prayers rushed or delayed because worldly matters felt more urgent. Each recollection tightened around him like a chain. He realized with growing dread that his downfall had not begun with grand crimes, but with the quiet corrosion of intention. The sins that destroyed him had not all been sudden. Many had been chosen patiently, defended intelligently, and repeated without repentance. In the villages he passed through, Yahya observed people whose lives were simple and difficult. They struggled for food, endured loss, and prayed with sincerity. Watching them unsettled him more than accusation ever had. These people owned little, yet their faces carried peace he had not felt in years. They spoke Allah's name without calculation, without fear of how they were perceived. Yahya recognized then that his greatest loss was not power or wealth, but the ability to surrender. He had lived as if everything depended on him, and now nothing did. At night, sleep brought no comfort. Dreams returned with greater intensity. He saw the orphaned boys standing before him, their hands empty, their eyes accusing. He saw the widow screaming while guards dragged her away. He saw the imprisoned man, silent and bruised, staring at him with a question Yahya could never answer. Sometimes he dreamed of standing before a vast scale, his deeds placed upon it, each sin heavier than the last, pressing the balance downward until the ground cracked beneath him. He woke each time with his heart racing, his mouth dry, and a single thought echoing in his mind: accountability. Yahya tried to pray regularly again, but it was unlike before. His words felt foreign, his movements heavy. He stood and bowed out of obligation rather than longing. Yet he persisted, driven not by sweetness, but by fear. Fear of dying in the state he was in. Fear of meeting Allah with a heart hardened by arrogance and injustice. He remembered his father's voice, calm and steady, warning him that knowledge without humility was a blade without a handle. Yahya now felt that blade cutting inward. News from the city continued to reach him through travelers. His name had become a cautionary tale. Children were warned not to become like him. Elders spoke of his fall as evidence that Allah humbles whom He wills. Some exaggerated his crimes, others minimized them, but all agreed that his end was deserved. Yahya listened silently when he overheard these conversations, never revealing who he was. Each word stung, yet he accepted them as part of the punishment he had invited upon himself. For the first time, he did not seek to defend his image. One evening, he encountered a man who recognized him. The man's eyes widened, not with awe, but with anger. He accused Yahya openly of destroying lives and corrupting justice. Yahya did not argue. He did not justify himself. He listened until the man's voice broke from exhaustion. When the accusations ended, Yahya lowered his gaze and said only, "You speak the truth." The man left confused, denied the confrontation he had expected. Yahya remained where he was, shaken but strangely lighter. This was new, accepting blame without resistance. Despite these moments, Yahya's struggle was far from over. Doubt plagued him relentlessly. He questioned whether repentance could erase crimes that had shattered lives. He wondered if Allah's mercy extended to someone who had known the truth and betrayed it deliberately. At times, despair crept in, whispering that continued effort was pointless. When these thoughts overwhelmed him, he remembered a verse he had once recited carelessly, now clung to desperately, that Allah's mercy is greater than all sins. He did not feel that mercy yet, but he began to believe it existed beyond his reach, waiting. Slowly, Yahya began to understand that his suffering was not abandonment, but exposure. Allah was not punishing him by turning away. Allah was stripping away illusions. The arrogance that once shielded him had collapsed, leaving him vulnerable but honest. He realized that true loss was not humiliation, but heedlessness. And for the first time since his rise to power, Yahya was fully aware. As winter approached, Yahya settled temporarily in a small town, surviving on modest work and charity he once would have dismissed. Each act of dependence humbled him further. Each day without recognition weakened the ego that had ruled him for so long. Yet his heart remained restless. Something was still unresolved. Confession alone was not enough. Regret without repair felt incomplete. Yahya knew that if his repentance were to be real, it would demand action, not just sorrow. And so, with fear tightening his chest, Yahya made a decision that would define everything that followed. He would return, not to reclaim status, not to defend himself, but to face what he had done, fully, openly, without protection. He knew the consequences could destroy him completely. But for the first time in his life, Yahya understood that salvation was not about survival. It was about truth. With that resolve forming painfully in his heart, Yahya began the journey back toward the city he once ruled, unaware that this step, taken in weakness, would prove far heavier than any throne he had ever held. Yahya's return to the city was not announced. He entered as a stranger wrapped in anonymity, walking streets that once opened for him effortlessly. The walls seemed narrower now, the alleys more suffocating. Every corner carried memory. Every doorway echoed with a version of himself he no longer recognized. People passed him without acknowledgement, and though anonymity spared him confrontation, it deepened his shame. He realized how much of his identity had depended on recognition. Without it, he felt hollow, reduced to a man carrying the weight of his past without the armor of authority. He did not go first to the courts or the council halls. He went instead to the poorest quarter of the city, where consequences lived visibly. The orphaned boys he had wronged lived there now with a distant relative, their inheritance long depleted, their childhood hardened prematurely. Yahya stood outside their home for hours, unable to knock. He rehearsed words that sounded inadequate the moment they formed. When the door finally opened, the older boy recognized him instantly. There was no surprise in the child's eyes, only bitterness sharpened by memory. Yahya spoke slowly, admitting his betrayal without defense. He offered what wealth he had left, though it was far less than what he had taken. The boy accepted the money without gratitude, his silence more condemning than anger. Yahya left knowing restitution could never restore trust, but that refusal to try would have been a deeper sin. Word spread quickly that Yahya had returned, and with it came hostility. Some accused him openly, others watched from a distance, suspicious of his intentions. He did not hide. When summoned before officials, he appeared without counsel, without excuses. He confessed to mismanagement, corruption, and injustice. Some crimes were documented, others were not. He spoke of them anyway. The court was unprepared for a man who did not seek to minimize guilt. Sentences were passed, assets were seized. Yahya accepted every ruling without protest. Each loss felt like another layer of himself being stripped away, but beneath the pain was a strange clarity. For the first time, punishment felt deserved. The most difficult encounter came when he faced the family of the man who had died in custody. They did not scream or curse him. They listened in silence as Yahya admitted his role. When he finished, the man's mother spoke softly, asking only one question. "Did you think of him as human?" Yahya could not answer. The question pierced deeper than any accusation. He understood then that his greatest crime had not been cruelty, but indifference. He left that meeting shaken, aware that some wounds could never be healed, only carried. As Yahya's public reckoning unfolded, his inner struggle intensified. Nights became unbearable. He prayed, but his heart felt suspended between hope and dread. Sometimes he feared that repentance itself was arrogance, that he presumed forgiveness where none was promised. Other times despair whispered that Allah had already turned away. In those moments, Yahya clung desperately to remembrance, repeating words of repentance until his voice broke. He began to understand that faith at this stage was not certainty, but persistence despite uncertainty. The city responded unevenly. Some admired his submission, others dismissed it as performance. Yahya accepted both reactions without attachment. He had learned that intention mattered more than perception. He sought out those he had harmed, one by one, even when it exposed him to humiliation. Each encounter drained him further, but also sharpened his awareness of responsibility. Repentance, he realized, was not a moment of emotional release, but a sustained willingness to bear consequences without resentment. Over time, Yahya's presence became quieter. He worked menial tasks, repaired what he could, gave what little remained in his possession. He spoke rarely, listened often. The arrogance that once fueled him had been replaced by caution. He guarded his intentions carefully, afraid of even subtle insincerity. When praised for his humility, he recoiled inwardly, reminding himself how easily pride had once disguised itself as virtue. Yet despite outward submission, inward peace remained elusive. Yahya feared dying before his repentance was accepted. He feared that his past would outweigh his present. He feared that Allah's justice would demand more than he could give. These fears did not paralyze him. They refined him. He learned to live without reassurance, trusting that sincerity itself was an act of worship. As months passed, something shifted. Yahya noticed moments, brief, fragile, when his heart softened during prayer. Tears returned, not from terror, but from longing. He began to feel the presence of Allah not as comfort but as closeness. These moments did not erase his guilt, but they sustained him. He understood then that forgiveness was not the erasure of memory, but the transformation of direction. Near the end of the year, Yahya fell ill. His body weakened quickly, exhaustion catching up with years of inner strain. Lying alone, he reflected on the strange mercy of his journey. Power had blinded him. Loss had awakened him. He did not know how his story would end, only that he had finally stopped running. As he whispered prayers in the quiet darkness, Yahya understood that his life had been broken into 3 acts: blindness, collapse, and return. The final act had not yet revealed itself, but for the first time, he was willing to meet it without fear of losing the world, because he already had. Yahya's illness did not announce itself with drama. It crept in quietly, as weakness often does, draining his strength day by day until even simple movements required effort. Those who passed by his modest dwelling assumed he was merely another forgotten man nearing his end. Few recognized him now, and fewer still cared. This anonymity, once unbearable, had become a mercy. It allowed Yahya to face his final days without distraction, without expectation, without performance. He was no longer tempted by how he appeared to others. What mattered now was how he stood before Allah. As his body weakened, his heart grew more attentive. Prayer no longer felt like obligation or fear-driven persistence. It became conversation, imperfect, halting, but sincere. Yahya no longer begged for forgiveness as a transaction. He asked for it as a servant who finally understood his place. He acknowledged Allah's justice without argument and his mercy without presumption. There were moments when his past returned sharply, when guilt surged and threatened to drown him. But now, instead of despair, Yahya responded with humility. He learned to say, "O Allah, I have no defense but your mercy," and to leave the matter there. People he had once wronged did not suddenly forgive him. Some never would. Yahya accepted this without bitterness. He understood that repentance did not entitle him to reconciliation. It obligated him to sincerity. He continued to make amends where possible, even as his strength faded. He asked forgiveness where he could, returned what little remained, and corrected lies he had once allowed to spread. Each act felt small compared to the harm he had caused, but he had learned that obedience was not measured by outcome, only by intention. In quiet moments, Yahya reflected on the nature of his fall. He saw now that his greatest sin had not been power itself, but forgetting that power was a trust. He had mistaken influence for worth, admiration for approval, and control for security. He had worshipped stability, reputation, and certainty, all idols dressed in respectable forms. Understanding this did not absolve him, but it freed him. He no longer feared losing what he had already surrendered. One night, as rain tapped softly against the walls, Yahya felt an unfamiliar calm settle over him. It was not relief from pain, nor certainty of forgiveness, but something gentler, acceptance. He understood then that true repentance was not the hope of escaping judgment, but the willingness to face it honestly. If Allah forgave him, it would be mercy. If Allah punished him, it would be justice. Either way, Yahya trusted that Allah was not unjust. That trust, fragile but real, was the greatest gift he had been given. As dawn approached, Yahya's breathing grew shallow. He whispered words of remembrance, not loudly, not desperately, but steadily. There was no vision, no miracle, no sudden assurance. Only quiet, only surrender. When his final breath left him, it did so without fear. The man who had once feared insignificance now feared nothing at all. Yahya ibn Salim died unknown, buried without ceremony. The city did not pause. Life continued. But somewhere beyond what eyes can see, A soul stood before its Lord, stripped of titles, stripped of excuses, carrying only repentance and hope. Whether forgiven by mercy or judged by justice, Yahya had returned to Allah as he truly was, not powerful, not admired, not feared, but sincere. And in that sincerity lay his salvation.